Daniel Osei stood alone in the narrow restroom at the Elmwood estate, both hands pressed flat against the marble counter. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. Through the wall, he could hear the faint sound of a string quartet warming up and the low hum of 180 guests finding their seats. The ceremony was supposed to start in 12 minutes. 12 minutes ago, Daniel had been the happiest man in that building. Now he was staring at a stranger in the mirror, trying to remember how to breathe. What he had heard 10 minutes ago in that hallway had not just broken his heart. It had dismantled everything he believed about the last 2 years of his life. Every memory. Every promise. Every moment he had told himself he was finally, genuinely loved. He had 3 choices. Walk out and cancel everything right now. Say nothing, go through with the wedding, and pretend he never heard a single word. Or do something else entirely. Something that the 180 guests waiting in that hall would never forget. The door handle rattled. "Danny? You in there, man?" It was his best friend, Jerome. "I'm fine," Daniel said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Just give me a minute. Ceremony starts in 12. Don't keep the woman waiting." Jerome's footsteps faded down the corridor. Daniel looked at himself in the mirror one more time. And then he made his decision. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel is built for people who believe that truth always catches up with lies, no matter how well they are hidden. Before we go any further, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on your notifications too, because powerful stories like this one are released every single week and you do not want to arrive late. Now let's go back to the beginning. Daniel Osei had not always worn tailored suits. At 22, he was sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other men and working double shifts at a construction firm 6 days a week. He was the one who mixed concrete at 5 in the morning and swept the site floor at 9 at night. He was the last one to complain and the first one to arrive. But Daniel had a plan. He had been sketching building designs since he was 14 years old, filling notebooks with floor plans and structural ideas that his teachers told him were too ambitious for someone in his situation. He chose not to believe them. By 25, Daniel had saved enough to enroll part-time in an architectural program while continuing to work. It took him 4 years instead of 3 to finish his degree. When he finally got his license, he started a small design studio out of a rented room with 1 desk, 1 computer, and a business name he had written on a piece of paper and taped to the wall, Osei Design Group. The first year was nearly silent. He ate the same meal 4 days in a row to save money. He called potential clients from a phone with a cracked screen. He revised proposals at midnight and sent them out before dawn. But slowly, work came. A small renovation here. A commercial fit out there. Word spread that Daniel Osei delivered exactly what he promised and never charged a dollar he had not earned. By 30, Osei Design Group had 18 employees, a proper office in the business district, and a reputation that opened doors without him having to knock. He had built something real. But he came home to an empty apartment every night, and that part never got easier. Then came the evening at the Meridian Business Forum, a networking event held annually at the Harrington Hotel. Daniel had been invited to present his firm's work on a community redevelopment project. Public speaking still made his palms sweat, but he knew it was necessary, so he prepared for 2 weeks and showed up ready. After his presentation, during the cocktail hour, a woman approached him near the window overlooking the city. "That project in the East Side District," she said. "You actually changed how people live there. That doesn't happen often." Her name was Vivian Caldwell. She worked as an investment portfolio manager at a firm her family had founded. She was elegant and precise in everything she said. She asked the right questions and listened to the answers. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Daniel had not meant to stay that long. They began seeing each other 3 weeks later. Simple dinners that turned into long conversations. Walks that ended well past dark. Vivian told him about the pressure of carrying a family name and always being expected to look perfect in every room she entered. Daniel understood that kind of pressure from the opposite direction, the pressure of building something with nothing and knowing that one bad year could erase everything. She laughed at that. "You understand more than most people who grew up with everything," she said. There was one evening, about 2 months in, that Daniel would think about long after everything fell apart. He had come home from a site visit exhausted and frustrated. A contractor had missed a deadline, a client was threatening to pull out of a project, and he had driven home in silence, too tired to think clearly. Vivian was already at the apartment when he arrived. She had not cooked anything elaborate. She had simply ordered his favorite food, turned off the overhead lights, and put on the record he always played when he needed to decompress. She did not ask him to explain the day. She just sat beside him on the couch and let him be quiet. After about 20 minutes, she took his hand and said, "Whatever it is, you'll figure it out. You always do." He had looked at her in that dim light and thought he had never felt so completely known by another person. That was the version of Vivian he fell in love with. That was the woman he was certain he was marrying. Which made everything that came later almost impossible to reconcile. He introduced her to his mother 6 weeks in. His mother took Daniel's hand afterward and said simply, "She's the kind of woman who knows what she wants." Daniel took that as approval. Vivian's family was a different experience. Her father, Chairman Caldwell, received Daniel at their large family home with the energy of a man conducting an interview. He asked about revenue projections, long-term business plans, and Daniel's position on risk. Daniel answered every question directly and without apology. At the end of the evening, Chairman Caldwell offered him a firm handshake and said, "I can see what she sees in you." They moved in together after 10 months. A spacious apartment on the 14th floor of a new development that Vivian chose and Daniel happily agreed to. They built a routine together quickly. Coffee every morning before work. Dinner together whenever schedules allowed. Weekends that felt genuinely shared. 18 months into the relationship, Daniel proposed at a quiet restaurant they had visited on their 3rd date. No performance. No crowd involvement. Just a ring that cost $9,500 and words that came straight from what he actually felt. Vivian said yes before he finished the sentence. The wedding planning began immediately, and that was when Daniel first noticed small things he could not quite name. Vivian became intensely focused on how the event would appear to people outside of them. The venue had to be Elmwood Estate. The guest list swelled to 180, with most additions coming from her family's circles. The dress cost $7,200. The total budget climbed past $60,000. When Daniel gently asked whether they needed quite so much, Vivian looked at him evenly and said, "The people attending this wedding make decisions that affect our careers. How we present ourselves matters." Daniel let it go. He told himself she was practical. He told himself he was overthinking it. He would later realize that those small moments were the truth trying to reach him. He had simply not been ready to hear it. The night before the wedding, Vivian stayed at her family home per her mother's request. Daniel spent the night alone in their apartment, too restless to sleep properly. He got up at 5:30, made coffee, and sat on the balcony watching the city wake up. He felt nervous in the way you feel before something enormous and good. He arrived at the Elmwood Estate by 11:30. Jerome met him in the parking lot. They went inside, found the groom's preparation room, and waited. Daniel paced. Jerome made jokes. Time moved slowly. At 1:40, Daniel stepped out to walk the corridor and clear his head. He walked toward the back of the building away from the guests. The hallways were quiet. He was passing a small sitting room when he heard Vivian's voice through a door that had not been pulled fully shut. He stopped. "Honestly, Reese," Vivian was saying, laughing lightly, "I thought I would feel something today. Some kind of nervousness. But I actually feel fine." "Cold as ever," a woman replied. That was Reese, her oldest friend and maid of honor. "Not cold," Vivian said. "Practical. Daniel is a good match. Stable, respected, ambitious. My father approved, which honestly matters more than I like to admit. The firm's investor circle will take him seriously, and that opens doors for both of us." But do you love him? Reese asked. A pause. Then, I care about what we've built. I care about the life we'll have. Is that the same thing? She laughed again. He loves me enough for both of us anyway. That's always easier. What about Marcus? Reese's voice dropped. What about him? Vivian said lightly. That's completely separate. That has nothing to do with today. Marcus knows where things stand. Vivian. Reese. I have made a sensible decision. Daniel is the right person to build a life with. What I do outside of that is my business. It always has been. Daniel stood in the corridor and did not move for a full 30 seconds. Then he walked back to the preparation room, sat down, and made his decision. When Jerome knocked and told him it was time, Daniel straightened his jacket and followed him out to the ceremony. 180 guests rose as the music changed. Vivian appeared at the back of the hall in her white dress, on her father's arm, composed and stunning and entirely certain that everything was going exactly as planned. She arrived at the altar. She smiled at Daniel with the same warmth she had shown him the night they met at the Harrington Hotel. He smiled back. The officiant welcomed everyone. He spoke about love and commitment and the weight of promises made in front of witnesses. Then he asked if anyone had reason to object. Daniel raised his hand. The room went absolutely silent. I do, he said quietly. He heard someone gasp behind him. He kept his eyes on Vivian, whose smile had begun to falter. I heard a conversation this afternoon, Daniel said, his voice steady and clear. Through a door that wasn't closed. I heard that this marriage is a practical decision. That I provide stability and access to the right rooms. That I love enough for both of us, which was described as convenient. He looked at Reese briefly. She was staring at the floor. Then back to Vivian. And I heard a name. Marcus. Described as completely separate from today. The silence in the room had a weight to it. Vivian's composure cracked at the edges. Daniel, this is not. I'm not angry, Daniel said. And he meant it. His voice did not shake. I just cannot stand at this altar and make promises that are already broken. He turned to the officiant. I'm sorry, sir. There won't be a ceremony today. The room did not stay silent for long. Someone near the back said something sharp and loud. A woman too rose from the front, burst into tears. Chairman Caldwell pushed himself to his feet, his face red, and said in a voice that carried across the entire hall that Daniel had no right to do this, that this was an outrage, that he would not allow his daughter to be humiliated by a man who had everything to gain from this marriage and nothing to lose. Several guests turned toward each other in urgent whispers. Others simply stared, frozen, unable to decide what expression to wear. Vivian stood at the altar and for a moment she said nothing. Then, her voice rising above the noise of the crowd, she looked at Daniel and said, You are throwing away everything over something you think you heard. You are making the worst mistake of your life and you do not even know it. Her voice broke at the end but her eyes were hard. It was not grief in them. It was fury at a plan that had stopped working. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, so that only she could hear, I know exactly what I heard, Vivian. He held her gaze one final second. Then he turned away. He placed his hand on the altar, removed his engagement gift, a watch Vivian had given him during their first Christmas together, and set it gently beside the ring she had handed back to him in that silent exchange. Then he stepped off the platform and walked down the center aisle. Chairman Caldwell was on his feet. Reese had her face in her hands. His mother, sitting in the third row, met his eyes as he passed and gave him the smallest nod he had ever seen. He pushed open the doors and walked out into the afternoon. Jerome found him in the parking lot 20 minutes later, sitting on the hood of his car, jacket off, looking at the sky. You okay? Jerome asked. Not yet, Daniel said honestly. But I will be. Jerome sat beside him on the hood of the car. The metal creaked under both their weight. Neither of them said anything for a while. Around them, confused guests were filing out of the venue in small clusters, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the parking lot. Daniel noticed but did not care. Finally Jerome said, "You want to know something? I never trusted her. Something about the way she talked about you. Like you were an asset. Like she was always keeping a running total of what you brought to the table." Daniel nodded slwly. "I know," he said. "I just wasn't ready to see it." "The signs were there," Jerome said. "Not unkindly. Just honest in the way only old friends can be. You wanted to believe what you saw at the beginning. Nothing wrong with that. It means you're a person who trusts people. That's not a flaw, Danny. That's just who you are." Daniel sat with that for a moment. He thought about the couch, the dim lights, the record playing, her hand on his. He thought about how real it had felt. Maybe it had been real then, or maybe she had simply been very good at performing warmth when it served her. He would never know for certain. And he was beginning to understand that the not knowing was something he would have to make peace with. "I just keep thinking," Daniel said quietly, "about how close I came." Jerome nodded. "Yeah," he said. "But you didn't." Daniel exhaled slowly. That was enough for now. He turned his phone on. 81 missed calls. He turned it back off. 2 weeks later, after staying with his parents and after the apartment was sorted and the lease untangled, Daniel agreed to meet Vivian one final time. She had asked 3 times. He said yes on the third because he knew he needed the closure more than she needed the conversation. They met at a small coffee shop on Aldrin Street, the kind of place with fogged windows and mismatched chairs. Vivian was already there when he arrived. She was dressed simply, no jewelry, hair down, both hands wrapped around a cup she had not touched. She looked like she had not slept properly in days. Daniel sat across from her and said nothing. He waited. "I don't know how to start," she said. "Then start with the truth," Daniel said. "For once." She flinched slightly. Then she said, "I did care about you. I want you to know that. Whatever you think you know about my reasons, that part was real. Caring about someone and choosing them are 2 different things," Daniel said. "You cared about me and chose a version of your life that I happened to fit into. That's not the same as loving me." Vivian looked down at her cup. "Marcus was a mistake," she said quietly. "It had been going on for 7 months. I kept telling myself I would end it. I kept telling myself it didn't change anything between us." "It changed everything," Daniel said. Not loudly. Not with anger. Just plainly, the way you state a fact. "I know," she said. And for the first time since the wedding, she looked like she genuinely meant something. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I think I was afraid. Of actually committing. Of it being real and permanent and then losing it. So I kept one foot outside the door. It was stupid and it was cruel and I don't expect you to forgive me for it." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. The woman sitting across from him was not the composed, polished person who had walked down the aisle in an $8,000 dress with 180 people watching. She was someone smaller than that. Someone who had spent 2 weeks sitting with what she had actually done. He thought about the record playing in the dim apartment. Her hand on his. "Whatever it is, you'll figure it out." He wondered if any of it had been real. He decided it did not matter anymore. "I hope you figure out what you actually want," Daniel said finally. "Not what looks right. Not what your father approves of. What you actually want." He pushed his chair back and stood. "I genuinely do. But I can't be part of whatever that is." He put on his jacket. He did not look back at her. He walked out onto Aldrin Street, into a cold afternoon, and kept moving. 3 days later, Daniel sat at his desk at Osei Design Group. He opened a new project file. He pulled out a notebook. And he started drawing again. That was what he had always known how to do. Build things. Start from nothing. Make something real. And this time, he was starting from truth. That is the end of today's story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment. Hit that button and join this community. A new story drops every week. Until next time, take care of yourself and never settle for anything that asks you to look the other way.